What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be discussing CP point distributions for stamina DPS as you're leveling. So this is an update to my previous CP distributions for stamina DPS from Clockwork City. Now that Dragon Mode has come out, there's been a couple of changes. Obviously the CP cap has been increased by 30, so you have 10 more CPs across each of the 3 different constellations to play around with. Plus there were a couple of changes here and there with a couple of combat rebalances. They aren't going to affect stamina DPS quite as much as they affected Magicka DPS when it comes to CP point distributions, but it's still something that you're going to want to take into consideration potentially as you are distributing your CP points. So before we get started here, I do want to make one quick note here, and that's concerning the blue CPs, so your mage CP points. Your CP point distribution that I'm going to show you guys today is a very general approach. So the specific CP point distribution that's going to be best for you and your DPS spec is going to vary depending on a couple of factors. For example, the raid buffs and debuffs that you have in your raid group. The specific class that you're playing, so Nightblades will have a different CP point distribution than Stamplars, for example. And then also what sets you're running. If you're running Mechanical Acuity, for example, you're going to be weighing in a little bit more heavily into Precise Strikes versus a build that uses Hundings and VO, for example. So all those are different factors that could take into that you are not taking into consideration when you're distributing your blue CPs. So like I said, this is going to be a very general approach. The CP point distribution that I'm going to show you guys will be good for all the different classes, but they will not be optimal for all the different classes. So that's something that you're going to want to take into consideration there. The second thing is we're going to, as we go through our different milestones, so the milestones that I've chosen are going to be CP 160, 300, 450, 600, and CP cap, which is now 720. When we start off with the CP 160s, I will be explaining each node, specifically why we're going with that particular node and how, what we want to focus in on as you guys continue to level in between these two milestones. So the first round of CP point distributions that I'm going to show you guys is going to be much longer than the rest, just because I will be going through those explanations. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. So we're going to start off with CP 160. So I do have to redistribute and clear my CPs. So now that we have that out of the way, we're going to start off with our green CPs. So as CP 160, you're going to have 53 points to put into your green CP trees. So starting off right now, you're going to be focusing on 2 nodes. The first node is going to be Mooncalf. This is pretty self-explanatory. Stamina regen is very good for your sustain. You kind of want to have good stamina sustain as a DPS. The second node that you're going to want to focus in on is going to be Tenacity, and that's just for the regen that you get when you heavy attack. So pretty much most stamina DPS, if not all stamina DPS, are doing at the very least 1 to 2 heavy attacks on your front bar. Some builds are even going as far as going with 3 heavy attacks on the front bar, for example Stam DKs and Stam Sorks. Some rotations have them doing 3 heavy attacks on the front bar instead of 2, or even 1. So this is really going to help out your sustain as well, because if you are going through a heavy attack rotation, this will help improve the amount of stamina that is restored to you when you do your heavy attack. So these are the first 2 nodes that you're going to want to focus in on. So we're going to be starting things off with 27 into Mooncalf and 26 in Tenacity. And now I'm going to take this moment to talk to you guys about jump points. So you can see here in Tenacity specifically that we do not make it up to 7.07% increase. Instead we're sitting at 6.85. Now normally you would think that this is either going to be an exact value, so your amount of stamina you get back is increased by 6.85, or that it is rounded up to 7%. However, the way the ESO uses these decimal points is that it actually drops them completely. So everything to the right of the decimal point is basically completely cut off, completely truncated, and so you're only left with the numbers on the left side of the decimal point. So in this instance, for example, in Tenacity, you're not getting 6.85, you're not getting 7% additional stamina regen, you're actually only getting 6. So this is what we call a jump point. A jump point is basically the value of the CPs that you have to put into a specific node in order to get to the next whole number. So for example, 27 is going to be a jump point for Mooncalf and Tenacity, because that is the turnaround point between 6 and 7%. Now, there are basically two different types of nodes, three different types of nodes, I should say, in each of the 9 different constellations. So you have the first type of node, which is percentage based, and it maxes out at 15%. The second type of node is also percentage based and maxes out at 25%. These two different nodes are both affected by jump points. However, obviously, because they have different max values, the jump points are going to differ between both of them. And the third type of node is going to be a flat increase node. So that's the node that will increase things like spell pen, physical penetration, your physical and spell resistances. Those increase by a set amount for each single CP. There is going to be what's called front loading with these CP points. So basically, due to the changes made in Morrowind, ZeniMax has decided to shift most of the gain into the first 50 points into the CP nodes. So the first 50 points put into CP nodes will get you to about 70 to 75% up to the max value, and then the remaining 50 will get you up the rest of the way. So you'll find that a lot of builds aren't necessarily investing as heavily into certain nodes anymore because of this shift to front loading your CPs. So that's something you want to take into consideration as you get into the higher CPs, so you're not necessarily going to be wasting your CPs by putting them too heavily into one node. Now for our blue CPs, so there are going to be, you're basically going to be focusing in on the ritual. Everything stamina DPS based is going to be focused in on the ritual here. So the most important node that you're going to want to focus in on is going to be mighty, because this affects pretty much all of your damage. Physical, poison, and disease damage, as you can see here. If you're running any proc sets, for example, if you're running Viper for as a DPS, this will actually Mighty will actually increase the damage of the proc set. It'll increase the damage of Veladreth if you're using Veladreth. And it'll also increase the damage of your enchants as well. So if you're running a poison enchant or a disease enchant, it'll actually increase the damage dealt by the enchant as well. So that's why Mighty is going to give you the best return. Following off of Mighty, Precise Strikes is going to be another very important node to invest in, because it does increase the damage that you deal whenever you do a critical hit. Now normally the percentage the increase in the percentage of a critical hit in terms of damage is going to be 50% additional damage, but obviously as you invest into Precise Strikes, that will increase. And so Stamina DPS typically run fairly good crit, especially if you're running Mechanical Acuity. You're going to be investing a lot of points into Precise Strikes in order to take advantage of the 100% crit chance. Then you have Thaumaturge and Master at Arms. So really quickly, Master at Arms increases damage done by direct damage. Direct damage is basically any ability that deals all of its damage in one blow. So for example, on a Nightblade, Surprise Attack would be considered a direct damage hit because it deals all of its damage in one hit. Conversely, Thaumaturge increases damage done by damage over time effects. As you can tell from the name, these are abilities that deal damage over a period of time, and these don't necessarily have to be single target, they can also be AoE. So for example, Stamina DPS, Caltrops, and Endless Hail, those two are considered damage over time effects, and so will scale with Thaumaturge and not Master at Arms. Now some skills will benefit from both. So a good example of this would be something like Poison Injection. The first hit of Poison Injection is considered a direct damage hit, but there is a damage over time component associated with it, and that damage over time component is affected by Thaumaturge. One thing that you're going to want to remember is that the tooltips that you see on your ability bars are not necessarily 100% accurate. We have noticed some discrepancies on the tooltip information compared to the actual damage dealt. So just be mindful of that when you take a look at the tooltip information. And then there's also of special note piercing. So this, you're going to invest in this node depending on how many debuffs and buffs that you're getting from your group. So remember that the stamina debuff, basically the penetration sets that you have to use on stamina are going to be Alkash from the tank. That is a 30-10 debuff on the enemy. Night Mother's Gaze, which is 2580 when it's fully golded out, that's a debuff on the enemy, and Sunderflame, which is 3440, which is again a debuff on the enemy's physical resistances. So you want to take that into consideration, as well as Infused Crusher, whether that's Torag's Infused Crusher or not. That's another debuff that you're going to want to pay special attention to, and of course Major and Minor Fracture. So if you have all those debuffs up, you actually don't need to put any points into piercing. However, if you're missing any of those debuffs, so for example, a lot of raid guilds actually aren't using Alkosh because it's just it takes a lot of effort to maintain 100% uptime, so you're not going to have very good consistent penetration. So Some guilds are not running allocate, and in that case you might want to put a couple of points into piercing to make up for that debuff, because running the lover might put you over the penetration cap by a significant margin, resulting in a DPS loss. So that's something to consider. Not so much here when you're at CP 160, but as you get into higher and higher CPs like CP 600, CP 500 and up, that's something you're going to want to take into consideration. So now that we've explained all of that, you have 53 points when you have CP 160, and we're going to basically do this. So we're going to hit the 5% jump point on Mighty. We're going to hit the 4% jump point in Precise Strikes. We are going to hit the 5%, actually we're going to hit the 5% jump point on both of these here. So that's 41, which leaves us with 12, and we're going to put the remaining 12 here into Master at Arms. We do jump over the 5% jump point, which was 11, and we missed the 60% by 1 point, but that's fine. As you're leveling up, you're going to want to try to hit those jump points by adding the CP points to the appropriate nodes. So for example here, once you get the 6% jump point after you get your next blue CP point, you might want to go into Mighty and put in the 4 CP points to get up to 6, and then move on to the rest of the nodes there. So that's kind of up to you how you want to spread it out, whether you want to do a kind of balanced approach, put Mighty up 1%, Precise Strike up 1%, Thaumaturge 1%, and so on, or if you want to kind of just focus in on one. I would recommend at least getting 30 points in here right away for the Perfect Strike passive, which increases your weapon crit by 12%. That would be the most important passive to get right away. Everything else is pretty much secondary to that. And now for our red CPs. So if you guys have watched any of my build videos, you'll know that I like to take a very balanced approach when it comes to red CP, so I don't have to pay 3,000 gold every time to redistribute my red CPs. And like I say in my build videos, you will potentially redistribute your red CPs depending on the content you're running. So we'd already talked about direct damage and damage over time, and we also talked about physical damage. So and then there's also magical damage, so flame, frost, shock, and magic damage. So all damage in a game can basically be categorized into these 4 different categories. So you have direct damage and damage over time physical damage, and you have direct damage and damage over time elemental damage, or magical damage, as some people like to call it. So depending on the trial, they have different distributions for each of these 4 different types of damage. So for example, Hellra Citadel, as a DPS, you'll be facing off against a lot more physical direct damage compared to magical damage over time damage. So that's something you want to take into consideration. So if you are going to be running Hellra, for example, you might want to take points out of Elemental Defender and put them into Hardy and Ironclad instead, because you'll be able to get more protection by putting more points into those 2 nodes. Now, of course, you don't have to do it, but if you're having trouble surviving in Hellra, then you might want to consider doing that to help improve your survivability, and that's going to be very important if, as you start to progress as a guild, and you start to potentially go for things like score runs or speed runs, because as you guys might be aware, dying results in no DPS being done, and you're actually taking away DPS from the group because somebody has to go res your dead body. So we're going to be taking a very balanced approach here. So the 2 nodes that we're going to be focusing in on are going to be Hardy and Elemental Defender, because just like with Mighty, these 2 nodes affect basically everything. So if you think of it as the 4 different types of categories, each of those will protect you against half of those categories. So that's why they're very important. The next important node that we're going to be focusing on is going to be Ironclad, and then Thick Skin's not quite as important as Ironclad. So you can think of it as this. Let's say you have 2 different types of damage coming in, incoming damage. One of them is a direct damage hit, so it deals 20k damage in 1 hit. The other damage hit is going to be 20k as well, but it's going to be a damage over time effect, and it takes, let's say, 5 seconds for it to deal all of its damage. Now, the direct damage is going to be much more dangerous to you because it's dealing all of its damage at once, and you typically are not necessarily going to have all that health required to survive that single hit. Compare that to damage over time. If you have a 20k hit over 5 seconds and it ticks and you have a tick every 1 second, that's only a 4k hit for each tick, and they're going to be basically Thick Skin's going to reduce the damage out of that 4k. So Thick Skin is not necessarily going to reduce necessarily as much, but on top of that, your healers will be able to heal you through that damage. So you might be able to drop something like Mutagen, you might be able to get You might be able to get healing springs off in order to get your make up for that damage that's incoming. So basically, with the damage over time effect, you do have that time frame to heal through that damage. You don't really have that opportunity with direct damage, which is why we're going to be investing more heavily into Ironclad compared to Thick-Skinned. So now we have 54 points to spread across the 4 nodes here at CP160. So we're actually going to be hitting, again, we're going to be hitting the 5% jump point for each of these, so 1919. Then we're going to hit the 3% jump point here, and that leaves us with 9, and then we're going to go 9 here. So we're hitting the 4% jump point on Ironclad here. So starting off, everything's a little bit more balanced because, we don't have as many CPs, but as we start to get higher and higher CPs, you'll see a bigger disparity between Thick-Skinned and Ironclad. So the next milestone we're going to be hitting is going to be CP 300. So at this point you have 100 CPs to divide across each of the 3 different constellations. So for green CPs it's going to be very easy. You're just going to go all the way up to 50 Mooncalf and 15 Tenacity. You're over the jump point by 1, but again, that's just the nature of leveling up. Just keep on putting points in until you hit those relevant jump points. For our blue CPs, this is going to be a little bit more complex. We're going to be putting a little bit more points into Mighty, and then we're going to be kind of ignoring Mastered Arms for a little bit. We're going to be foregoing Mastered Arms because our strongest abilities actually scale off of Thaumaturge, so that's Endless Hail, Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, the standard Stamina Kit, and then everything else from there, if you're going with the typical dual-wield bow build, Rending Slashes scales off Thaumaturge. I believe Deadly Cloak also scales off Thaumaturge. So you have a lot of damage over time abilities, so Thaumaturge is going to be a little bit more useful to invest early on. So for Mighty, we're going to go up to the 8% jump point. For Precise Strikes, we also want to invest pretty heavily into Precise Strikes as well, so we're going to jump up to 26. Going to hit 10% here. Actually, no, we're going to hit 11% with Thaumaturge. We're going to hit 7% here in Mastered Arms. So you can see here we are investing a little bit more heavily into Thaumaturge, and eventually this will even out as we get more and more CP points, because at a certain point it's going to be not as recommended to stack into Thaumaturge anymore, but this is probably the most balanced approach right now. For our red CPs, we're going to be dumping, again, focusing mostly on Hardy Elemental Defender, so we're going to jump up to the 8% jump point, bump this up to the 8%, and also 8% here. And so we're both sitting at 18, 18, 32, 32. So everything here is sitting at 8%. Now at this point we're going to start deviating a little bit. We're going to be putting fewer points into Thick-Skinned and more points into Ironclad here. Now, next milestone we're going to be talking about is going to be CP 450. So at 450 now, you're kind of sitting at that point where you can reasonably start getting into vet trials, because now you have enough CPs to increase your DPS. So remember that as you increase your CPs, you're getting more and more out of these passives, so you're helping to improve your sustain, improve your survivability, and improve your DPS. CP 300, which was the previous milestone, that is the point where you no longer gain resources by continuing to level up and continuing to gain CP. So at CP 300, you are already at your max health, max stamina, and max magicka, ignoring things like passives and food and things like that. So for green CPs, it's also, again, can be very simple. You can hit 75 on both of them. Now, from here on out, you can continue to put points into these 2 nodes up until you get all the way up to 100. That's kind of up to you. If you noticed here, the difference between 100 and 75 is going to be 25 CP points. In addition, if you remember that these 2 nodes top out at 15%, you're basically investing 25 points for a 1% additional gain. Some people think that's completely worth it. Other people don't quite think that's worth it. I'm one of the people in the latter camp where I think at this point you should start investing in other nodes, especially the stamina DPS, because you will want to conserve your stamina for actually DPSing and not for things like blocking and dodge rolling. So at this point here, as you continue to level up, now is the time to start investing in other nodes. So which nodes you want to invest in are going to depend on the passives that you want first. So the Shadow passive has probably the more useful passive, Fortune Seeker, which increases the gold you find in treasure chests, Merchant Favored, which decreases the cost of repairing your armor, and Treasure Hunter, which increases the quality of the items that you find in treasure chests. The tower does have a fairly useful node here, which is Inspiration Boost. This is only really useful up until you hit 50 on all of your crafting crafting skill trees, so that's not quite as important or as useful as these three. These three will always be useful no matter what CP or what your crafting level is at. So from this point onward, I would invest in things like Shadow Ward, Tumbling, Warlord, and that's just to help conserve your stamina, so you're using it to DPS rather than, breaking free, because breaking free and blocking actually do cost a fair amount of stamina, all things considered. I think it's about 1700 stamina for for blocking without any sort of reduction. So you want to use that stamina to actually damage things instead of defending yourself. Now for our blue CPs, we're still going to continue to invest fairly heavily into Mighty here. So we're going to hit the 11% jump point here. We're going to hit 16 jump point here, so that's going to be 40. Going to be hitting 14 here. And then we're going 27 here, so we're just shy a little bit of the 12% jump point. We're 1 point off. Again, that's just the nature of leveling up. And so for now, some people like to go all the way up to 64 for Mighty. Other people like to go only up to 56. 56. That's the next jump point. It's kind of up to you. I'm of the opinion to go all the way up to 64, which is a 30% jump point, but that's kind of up to you whether you want to do that or not. It's really going to be dependent on how many points you think you're going to end up putting into piercing. For our red CPs, again, just like with Hardy, we're going to go all the way up to the 11% jump point, so 49 across each of these. We're not going to invest as much in the thick skin. We're only going to be jumping up to the 10% jump point. And here we are at 12%. We do, again, are not hitting the jump point exactly. We're actually one above it, but that's okay. We're still leveling up and gaining CPs. Now the next milestone is going to be CP 600. At this point, you definitely have enough CPs to do the Vet Craglorn trials, and you will have enough CPs, generally speaking, to get into Vet Maw and Vet Hoff runs and Vet Asylum runs. At this point here, you have plenty of CPs. Your DPS is going to be very, very good, as long as you've been practicing your rotation and you have a decent build. So just like I mentioned earlier, you can put 100 in here, and that's basically it. You're done with your CP distributions. But if you don't want to do that, if you're one of the people who thinks, I don't want to invest 25 points into these two nodes only for 1% additional return, then you can basically split their 50 points however you'd really like. So you can go something like 20 and 10 if you'd like. This is probably what I would do. Just the way the number of CPs that you have and the way that the jump points work out, there's not really going to be a way to evenly distribute them so that you hit all the jump points nicely. Remember, you still are leveling up. You still have 120 CPs left to gain, so 40 CPs left in the green tree. So don't feel like you have to hit the jump points even at this stage, because you do have plenty of CP that are remaining that you have to earn. And now for our blue CPs, so we are going to be jumping Mighty all the way up to 64 now. We're going to be putting up to 19 in precise strikes now. Going to hit 48 in Thaumaturge, and then the remaining 10 points are going to be put into Mash with Arms, which hits the 15% jump point. So that is pretty much it here. Now, Mighty, at this point, you can pretty much stop putting points into Mighty. The next jump point is going to be 75, which is 14%. This is the 14% jump point. So you can hit that if you'd like. Most people that I talk to don't think it's worth it, because you still want to invest into Thaumaturge and Precise Strikes as well as Master at Arms later on. So for Precise Strikes, some people stop at 56, some people stop at 61. So 56 is the 20% jump point, 61 is the 21% jump point. That's kind of up to you which one you want to do. It's also going to be dependent on your build. So if you're going to be using Acuity, you might want to consider going up to 61 because, to take advantage of the Acuity proc. And for Thaumaturge, some people like to stop at 52, which is the 51 I should say, which is the 19% jump point. Other people like to stop at 56. Again, that's kind of up to you how you want to play with that. Whichever one you decide to stop at, once you've hit your goal, you're going to want to start putting points back into Master at Arms to help increase your direct damage attacks. Now for our red CPs, we're still going to hit 64, just like with Mighty. We're going to be hitting 14 here, and then we're going to be hitting 38 here. So we're going to be just above the 15% jump point here. And again, we are still leveling. You still have 40 more points here. As you can see here, we still have 40 points until max CPs. So, don't worry too much about not hitting the jump points still. And finally, we hit max CP. So this is we're going to be 240 points into each of the 3 different constellation colors. And again, I have links down in the description below to all the builds, so you can take a look at, or at least I have a link down in the description to the playlist for all of my builds, so you guys can see what the specific blue CP point distribution is going to be for your specific build. So if you don't have any builds, or if you're using a build that I'm not using, then I highly recommend picking up combat metrics and constellations if you're on PC, and using those 2 add-ons to figure out the most optimal CP point distribution for you, your group, and your build specifically. So for our green CPs, I like to go with 31, 31, and then 28, but like I say in all my build videos, you can distribute these however you'd like depending on the passives. So for example, you can drop one of these to 28 and put this up to 31 if you still want that inspiration boost passive. For our blue CPs, so this is where you're going to want to take a look at various build videos to kind of get a sense of what the optimal CP point distribution is for your specific class using your specific build under the your specific debuff situation. So it's going to be different for every single person, or most people I should say are going to have very different CPs. This particular distribution is going to assume that you have all the debuffs active, so you have Infused Crusher or Infused Thorax Crusher, Night Mother's Gaze, Thunder Flame, and Allocate active in the group, so we don't need any points into Piercing. Of course, this is not going to be true for all groups, so you're going to want to take that in consideration. Again, check out build videos, not just mine. You can check out Allcast's videos, and see what they're using on their tunes and under what kind of assumptions. So we're sticking with 64 into Mighty. I'm actually going to push myself only up to 56, and I'm going to push myself up to 56 here with Thaumaturge. I'm going to push myself up to 51 here at Master at Arms. Actually, we'll hit 56. Actually, so we'll get the 20% up to Master at Arms, and then we're going to be at 8% for Physical Weapon Expert. You don't have to do 8 in Physical Weapon Expert if you'd like, because these only affect light and heavy attacks. It's useful because these are actually very unique nodes. Physical Weapon Expert and Staff Expert both top off at 35, so you get a lot of return for very few CP points. You can see here we get 5% with only 8 CP points invested. But by all means, you can do something like this instead and hit 64 in Master at Arms, or 64 into Thaumaturge if you'd like. Or if you don't want to do that, you can even do something like go all the way up to 61 in Precise Strikes, and 61, not 61. You can invest the remaining 3 into here to get 2% on your Physical Weapons Expert. So if you want to go up to 61 with Precise Strikes, here's a way to do that, and still hit all your appropriate jump points here. Finally, for our red CPs, we're keeping Hardy and Elemental Defender topped off at 64. We're not going to go any higher because there's just no reason to do so. It's just not as strong of a return. You still want to invest in Thick Skin and Ironclad. So we're going to actually jump all the way up to 21 on Ironclad. And we're going to put 51 into Thick Skin, so we hit the 90% jump point. So this is very nice and even. We hit all the jump points across these 4 nodes here. Now, something that I do want to mention with red CPs, now that we have all of our CPs settled, is the Field Physician passive. So Field Physician passive, when you're resurrecting another player, it reduces the damage you take by 15%. This is, as a Stamina player, you're typically not going to be resurrecting somebody unless you're a Stamina Templar, because Templars do have a faster res passive under one of their skill trees. So you're not really going to be resing too much because you don't have access to a shield. But if you want to get the Field Physician passive, then you can invest 10 points into Quick Recovery, or 11 if you want to hit that jump point, but it's not absolutely necessary. A lot of Stamina DPS that I know and that I run with actually don't put any points at all under the Lord because they're not resurrecting. It's usually the Magicka DPS or the Stamina Templar that's doing the resing instead. So that's it for this video. So again, the blue CPs that I showed you guys are a very generalist approach. They work well with all classes, but they're not optimal for all classes. You're going to want to use constellations and combat metrics to figure out what's best for your group, for your build, for your class. And the same thing with the red CPs. They're They work well for all content, but depending on the content you're running and how survivable you want to be, and how well optimized you want to be for that trial, you might want to shift a couple of points around. So, for example, if you're running Hell Ra, you might want to put more points into Hardy and Ironclad and take them out of Elemental Defender because you're not taking as much magical damage. That's something for you to decide. I can only, advise you if on a optimal CP point distributions if you want to do that. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.